Greetings and welcome back to Darktime Diaries. I know many of you use this story to sleep, but before do so, do well to comment where you are watching from, and if this is your first time coming across this channel, welcome. We share amazing story that will keep you entertained and coming back for more. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss out on our next upload. In the heart of a quaint village, tucked away among whispering woods and winding cobblestone paths, stood St. Mary's Church, a place I once thought of as a sanctuary. For years it had been my refuge, my purpose. But now it felt cold, lifeless, and suffocating, like it had become a monument to something long forgotten. Its towering spire, once reaching confidently toward the heavens, now seemed to droop under the weight of its silence, just like me. I had served as the church's priest for over 2 decades, pouring my heart and soul into my faith. But everything changed when I lost my sister, Eliza. Her laughter had been the light in my life, the sound that could brighten even the darkest days. And then just like that, she was gone. No explanation, no warning, just gone. I prayed for answers. I prayed for peace, for understanding, for a sign that God hadn't abandoned me. But no matter how hard I prayed, there was nothing. Just silence. The grief hollowed me out, and with time, that emptiness turned into anger. I wasn't just sad anymore, I was furious. One stormy night, as thunder rumbled through the sky and rain battered the village, something inside me broke. I couldn't take it anymore. If God wouldn't give me the answers I needed, then I'd make him listen. I stood outside the church, soaked to the bone, with a canister of kerosene in one hand and a lighter in the other. My hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of what I was about to do. "If you won't answer me," I muttered through clenched teeth, "then I'll burn your house down." I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped inside. The familiar scent of incense mingled with the damp, musty air, but it brought me no comfort. The flickering candlelight threw long, distorted shadows across the walls, making the place feel alive and unwelcoming. I walked slowly down the aisle, my footsteps echoing in the silence. With every step, my resolve grew stronger. I uncapped the kerosene and began pouring it over the pews. The sharp, acrid smell filled my nose as the liquid soaked into the wood. Every splash felt like a statement, a cry of defiance in the face of a God who had turned his back on me. When I reached the altar, I stopped. The lighter felt heavy in my hand, like it was daring me to strike it. But before I could make a move, the temperature in the room dropped sharply. A cold chill swept through the air, making me shiver despite the sweat that clung to my skin. Then I heard it, a voice. It wasn't loud, but it filled the entire church, resonating in a way that made my chest tighten. "You're treading dangerous ground," it said, calm yet heavy with warning. I froze. My eyes darted around the sanctuary, but I saw no one. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. "Show yourself." From the shadows in the far corner of the church, something began to take shape. At first it looked like smoke, swirling and shifting in the dim light. But as it moved closer, it solidified into a figure, tall, strange, and unsettling. Its eyes burned with an unnatural light, piercing straight into me, and I could feel it pulling at my thoughts, my fears. "I'm a messenger," it said, its voice neither male nor female, but a haunting blend of both. "And your actions have consequences far beyond what you can imagine." I clenched my fists, anger flaring up again. "I don't care. I want justice for my sister. If God won't give it to me, I'll take it myself." The figure tilted its head, almost as if it were amused. "Justice? Or vengeance?" it asked, its tone soft but cutting. "Be careful which one you're really after. The path you're on doesn't lead where you think it does." Before I could respond, something invisible slammed into me, knocking me off my feet. Pain exploded through my body as unseen claws raked across my skin, leaving marks that burned like fire. Around me, the church came alive. The walls seemed to pulse, and the stained glass windows warped, their serene images twisting into grotesque, horrifying shapes. I tried to speak, to cry out, but the words caught in my throat. I couldn't even pray. The figure loomed closer, its face shifting until it looked like a distorted version of my own, except its eyes glowed like burning embers. "You can't fight the divine with fire and fury," it said, its voice soft but heavy with certainty. The battle you're fighting isn't with God. It's with yourself. Tears filled my eyes as the truth of its words hit me. My anger, my grief, my need for vengeance, they weren't going to bring Eliza back. They weren't going to heal the hole inside me. Slowly, I reached for the crucifix around my neck. I clutched it tightly and whispered, "Forgive me, Eliza. Forgive me, Lord." The weight in the air lifted. The shadows retreated. The figure vanished and the church was silent again. But I wasn't the same. The kerosene still lingered in the air, a sharp reminder of what I'd almost done. I got up, my body aching, and began to clean up the mess I'd made. As I wiped the pews and scrubbed the floor, it felt like I was doing more than just cleaning the church. I was starting to cleanse myself. When dawn finally broke, the first rays of sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting the altar in soft, vibrant colors. I knelt there, letting the warmth wash over me. This time, my prayer wasn't one of anger or desperation. It was quiet, simple, and sincere. "Help me find the strength to carry on," I whispered. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a glimmer of peace. I arrived in Elder Grove on the eve of a harvest moon. The town was small, the kind of place where people trust their neighbors but whisper about them behind closed doors. I saw it in their eyes, the weight of their secrets, the burden of their sins. They welcomed me, of course. They always do. Father O'Malley had fallen ill, his body suddenly frail, his voice stolen by something beyond fever. They needed a priest. I was set. That is all they needed to know. St. Agnes was old, its walls heavy with prayer, its altar soaked in the echoes of 1,000 confessions. But faith is not built on words. It is built on fear. And these people had forgotten how to be afraid. That would change. At Mass, I spoke of things they did not want to hear, of darkness, of choices, of the thin veil that separates this world from the next. They listened, though their hands trembled in their laps. Some turned their eyes away. Others leaned in, drawn to truths they did not yet understand. Then I invited them. "Come," I said, "tonight at the hour when shadows stretch the longest. Come and I will show you the truth." And they did. At midnight they filled the pews, whispering amongst themselves, their breath fogging in the sudden chill that clung to the church. The doors shut behind them without a hand to close them. The candles burned low. The night itself seemed to press against the stained glass windows, watching. I stood at the altar, the book before me. It was older than this church, older than the town, older than the faith they clung to like a tattered blanket. I placed my hands upon it and I spoke. The words were not Latin, not Greek, not any language they had heard before. They were older than scripture, older than sound itself. They rolled through the air like a gathering storm, thick and humming with power. And then the veil tore. The darkness came, swift and absolute, swallowing every flicker of light. They gasped, cried out, clutched at their rosaries and each other, but I did not stop. They needed to see. One by one the visions took them. Emily, the girl in the front pew, saw her grandmother. Not as she remembered her, warm and loving, but as she truly was, writhing in the pit where she had been cast, her eyes hollow, her voice a wail of regret. Mr. Harris, the old drunk, clutched at his chest, feeling the weight of every life he had ruined, every kindness he had twisted. His hands burned as he tried to wipe away sins that had already been counted. And then there was young Thomas, who had always been told he was good, who believed his soul was unstained. He looked into the dark and saw the thing that had always lurked inside him, the hunger, the cruelty, the truth of what he was. The church trembled with their screams. I watched. I waited. When the fear reached its peak, when they stood at the precipice of understanding, I shut the book. The darkness recoiled. The light returned. The church was silent, save for the ragged breathing of the broken souls before me. I stepped down from the altar, walking among them, their wide, tear-streaked faces turned to me, searching for answers, for comfort. "You have seen," I told them. "You have faced the truth that hides in the shadows of your soul." Some wept. Some stared, empty and hollow. Now you must choose. A choice, yes. To turn away, pretend they had seen nothing, return to their lives of whispered lies. Or to change. to shed their masks, to let the truth guide them. Most would forget. They always do. The mind is fragile and fear is an unwelcome guest. They would wake the next morning, the memory already fading, a nightmare slipping through their fingers. But some would remember, and for them life would never be the same. By dawn I was gone. My work was done. The book remained locked away in the church, waiting for the next soul who dared to seek the truth. And in the wind that howled through the empty streets of Elder Grove, I left them one final whisper. The truth is not found in the light, but in the shadow it casts. I arrived in Black Hollow on a cold, gray evening. The air felt thick, almost unnatural, as if something unseen was pressing down on me. The town was small, the streets eerily quiet, the buildings old and weary. But I wasn't here for the town, I was here for the church. A towering, Gothic structure at the center of it all, its dark spires reaching for the sky like skeletal fingers. It had been without a pastor for some time, and now it was my turn to take the pulpit, to lead these people in faith. The doors groaned as I pushed them open. Inside, the church was dim, the heavy scent of aged wood and wax lingering in the air. The stained glass windows cast muted colors onto the pews, where I knew my congregation would soon gather. And at the front, the pulpit stood waiting. A massive, ornate thing carved from dark oak. The symbols etched into its surface were strange, twisting patterns that I didn't recognize. There was something about it, something heavy like a presence clinging to the wood. I reached out, running my fingers along its edge. The moment I touched it, a chill spread through my hand, traveling up my arm like a creeping frost. I should have let go. I didn't. Sunday morning came with a thick fog crawling through the streets, wrapping around the church like a ghostly embrace. I stood before the congregation, my hands resting on the pulpit, my heart steady. I opened my Bible. Brothers and sisters, today's message is about a whisper, right behind my ear. I froze. The voice was low, breathy, unintelligible. I turned sharply, expecting to see someone standing close. There was no one. I swallowed hard and pressed on. As I was saying, today's message is a scraping sound. It came from beneath me, beneath the pulpit. I hesitated. My fingers clenched the wood. A strange, unnatural cold seeped into my skin. Then the whisper came again. This time I understood the words. Get out while you can. A shiver crawled down my spine. I looked at the congregation. They sat still, watching, waiting. None of them seemed to hear what I was hearing. I forced myself to finish the sermon, my voice steady but my mind racing. The whispers didn't stop. They coiled around me, pressing into my thoughts like fingers gripping my skull. And beneath it all, a terrible rhythmic thumping against the wood beneath my feet. Like something was trying to get out. That night I couldn't sleep. The church records were old, brittle with time, but I needed answers. The same name kept appearing, Elias Crowley. He had been the pastor here over a century ago. But one day in 1897 he disappeared. No record of his departure. No funeral. Nothing. I felt it then. That cold presence creeping into the room. A sound. Tap, tap, tap. Soft, deliberate, coming from the church hall. I grabbed a candle, its flame flickering wildly as I stepped into the sanctuary. The air was thick, charged, almost humming with something unseen. The pews stood empty, stretching into the darkness. But the whispers, they were everywhere now. I approached the pulpit, my heart pounding. Something shifted beneath it. I dropped to my knees, pressing my ear to the wood. A faint, ragged breath came from inside. I shouldn't have done it, but I pried the base open. The smell hit me first, rotting, ancient decay. Inside, beneath the pulpit, was a skeleton. The bones were twisted, arms bound in rusted chains. The skull was tilted upward, its jaw locked open in an eternal scream. And on the decayed remnants of cloth, I saw it. The embroidered name, Elias Crowley. My hands trembled. The candlelight flickered. And then, a voice deafening right behind me. You took my place. The pulpit shook violently. The whispers became screams. The candle snuffed out. And in the suffocating darkness, something breathed. Changed, thick, suffocating, pressing against my chest like unseen hands. My candle had gone out, leaving me in total darkness. But I wasn't alone. The voice had been right behind me. The pulpit was shaking, the wood groaning as if something inside was trying to claw its way out. And then footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from all directions at once. I held my breath. My body was frozen, my mind screaming at me to run, but my legs refused to move. Then something cold brushed against my neck. I spun around wildly, but there was nothing. Only shadows stretching long and twisted, curling against the church walls like grasping fingers. But the pulpit, it was opening. The hidden compartment beneath it shifted on its own, the wood creaking as the skeleton inside moved. The chains that bound its ribcage rattled, its skull twitching, the gaping mouth somehow widening. And then, a sound. Not a whisper this time. Not a scream. But a slow, wet, ragged breath. I stumbled backward, my feet slipping on the stone floor. The whispers returned, louder now, overlapping, growing into a chorus of pleading voices. Let us out. It hurts. He won't let us go. I squeezed my eyes shut. No, this wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Then the voice I had heard before, the deep, thunderous one that had spoken directly into my ear, came again. You took my place. Something grabbed my wrist. I screamed, yanking my arm away, stumbling into a pew. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart hammering. I could feel it, the cold weight of something watching me, something ancient, something hungry. Then I saw them. Figures standing in the pews. Dozens of them. They were nothing more than shadows, faceless forms shaped like people, their bodies flickering like candle flames. But they were there. And they were watching me. The pulpit lurched forward, the wood splintering. The skeleton of Elias Crowley sat upright, its hollow sockets locked onto me. The chains binding its bones began to snap, one by one, as if something unseen was releasing it. I had to get out. I turned toward the church doors and ran. But they slammed shut before I could reach them. The whispers grew deafening. The shadows moved, slipping from the pews, gliding toward me. He did this to us. We are trapped. You must end it. I shook my head violently. No, this wasn't real. But the moment I looked back at the pulpit, I knew I was wrong. The wood was changing. It was no longer just a structure. It was alive. The carvings in the wood shifted, the symbols twisting, rearranging into faces, dozens of screaming faces, their mouths contorted in agony, their hollow eyes watching me. The air shook with something powerful, something beyond words. And then from within the pulpit, it emerged. A hand. Not bone. Not human. But something far worse. Blackened, stretched too long, with fingers that ended in splintered points. It clawed at the pulpit's edge, dragging itself out. A figure followed. Tall. Twisted. Wrapped in tattered robes that moved like smoke. Its face was Elias Crowley's, but stretched into something unnatural. His hollow eye sockets were filled with writhing darkness, his mouth an endless void. You took my place. I couldn't move. The thing stepped down from the pulpit, its body shifting, warping. Its fingers stretched toward me. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the Bible from the altar and held it up, my hands trembling. Be gone. I shouted, my voice barely steady. In the name of God. Laughter. Not from Crowley. From everywhere. The shadows, the whispering voices, the walls themselves. The church was laughing at me. Then the figure moved faster than I could react. Its hand plunged into my chest. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. The pain was unimaginable, like my soul was being ripped apart. My vision blurred, my body convulsing as something dark and cold began to pour into me. I realized in that moment what this was. A ritual. Crowley hadn't disappeared. He had been taken. And now it was my turn. I don't remember what happened after that. I woke up at the pulpit, my hands resting on the wood. The congregation sat before me, their faces expectant. I tried to speak, but I couldn't. Not because I had lost my voice. Because I wasn't in control anymore. My body moved on its own. My mouth spoke words I didn't choose. And deep inside my own mind, trapped in the darkness, I finally understood. I hadn't escaped. I hadn't won. I had simply taken his place. And somewhere deep within the pulpit, Elias Crowley's hollow voice whispered to me one last time, "Welcome to St. Matthias." I have always been a faithful servant of the Lord. I gave my tithes, I attended every service, and I prayed with all my heart. But faith alone never seemed to be enough. Life had taken everything from me. My husband walked out on me years ago. My only son lay in a hospital bed, his little body eaten away by a sickness that refused to let go. The doctors had already given up. My prayers had turned to whispers, my hope to dust. One night, I found myself alone in the church, kneeling before the altar, my hands clenched so tightly that my nails cut into my palms. I begged. I wept. I told God I would do anything to save my son. And then, I felt it. A presence. Not the warmth of God's love. Not the peace of the Holy Spirit. This was something else. The air around me grew thick, suffocating, cold. My skin prickled with an unseen touch. My breath hitched in my throat. And then I heard it, soft at first, then growing, curling around my ears like smoke. A voice. It wasn't loud, nor was it angry. It was smooth, patient, almost comforting. It spoke of things I dared not dream of. It promised me salvation, not for myself, but for my son. I knew who it was. I didn't ask questions. I didn't hesitate. I agreed. The first death came the following Sunday. A deacon, a good man, collapsed right in the middle of service. One moment he was singing, the next he was gone. No one understood what had happened. Some said a heart attack. Others whispered about bad omens. But I knew. That night the hospital called. My son was cured. Completely. The doctors couldn't explain it. They called it a miracle. I called it payment. I thought that would be the end of it. That I had done what I had to do, and now life would return to normal. I was wrong. The deaths didn't stop. A week later, another. Then another. And another. The church began to feel different. The air inside was heavy, thick with something unseen. The crosses no longer felt comforting. The prayers seemed to echo into nothing. The walls groaned at night, and the candlelight flickered in ways it shouldn't have. I saw things. Dark shapes moving at the edge of my vision. Shadows shifting even when no one was near. The stained glass, once so beautiful, now seemed wrong. The saints in the glass looked as though they were weeping. And the whispers, they never stopped. At first they only came at night, soft, almost gentle, just beneath my hearing. But soon they followed me everywhere. They whispered in the hymns. They echoed in the pastor's sermons. They spoke when no one else was around. Then I started seeing him. I would be sitting in the pews and I would feel him watching me. A dark figure, always in the same spot, always smiling. No one else seemed to notice. No one else could notice. I tried to pray, but the words felt empty. My faith, once my greatest shield, was now useless. God wasn't listening. He hadn't been listening for a long time. And then one night he came to me again. I didn't need to turn around to know he was there. The air chilled, my breath slowed, and the shadows in my room deepened unnaturally. "I gave you what you wanted," the voice whispered. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My body was no longer mine. His presence filled the room, wrapping around me like smoke. I felt my skin crawl, my bones turn to ice. My vision blurred, and for a moment I saw something, a glimpse of something far worse than death. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. Then darkness. They found me the next morning. Sitting in the front pew, my face frozen in terror, my hands still clenched as if holding on to something unseen. They said my heart had stopped, but they couldn't explain why. And beside me, written in blood on the church floor, were the words, "He that mocketh a deal with the devil shall know no peace." That was the last day St. Mark stood. That night, a storm rolled in and lightning struck the church. Flames engulfed it, burning it down to nothing but ruins. But the whispers, they never left. Some say if you stand near those ruins you can hear me. My voice still begging, still trapped. And sometimes if you listen closely you'll hear him too, laughing, waiting for the next desperate soul.